All right, on our second day right here, we're going to take a look at Jacksonian controversies. But before we jump right into that, let's recap really quickly the big three things of Jacksonian democracy from yesterday's lesson. The three big things to take from Jacksonian democracy is one, belief in the common man, two, universal white male suffrage, and three, popular campaigning. The belief in the common man. I'm just an average Joe, but I am what America is. And every presidential candidate from Jackson on forward is going to try to sell to the common man that they are for them, that they represent them, that they are behind them. Universal white male suffrage, as new states in the West are coming into the Union, right? They do not have the elite of the East Coast or of the Northeast, the rich bankers, the rich businessmen. They are just common farmers, and so most states out west are granting all white men suffrage, which was very unique and unheard of at the time period. But these states are doing it because, well, they don't have these rich elite bankers and businessmen in their states, not yet at least. That's for American history too. And then popular campaigning of basically, as you know today, there's no hold bars. They're going to call each other out. They're gonna sling mud at one another, and they're just going to go after one another. They're going to go into local towns and get to these common men. So really, what democracy, what you know it as today, guys, it really takes hold during this time period right here. So again, big three from Jacksonian democracy, belief in the common man, universal white male suffrage, and popular campaigning. Now, moving in today with Jacksonian controversies, we'll look at a couple of them. There's three right here on the screen we're going to take a look at: the Bank War, the Indian Removal Act, and the Nullification Crisis. But before we really get into these, I thought I would tell you a little bit about something about Jackson, and it's a very good way to shed light into the type of man that he is and how he's going to react to certain issues. The first one of these is the Jackson Dickinson duel in 1806. And to keep it real short, Dickinson had called Jackson out on a couple of things, called him a coward, called him a bunch of different names. And in fact, even stooped as low as calling his wife out, Rachel, on some things, which, as you know, at this point in time, you don't talk smack about one another and then expect nothing to happen. In fact, most Southern men considered dueling, even though it was outlawed at this point in time in 1806. Most Southern men considered dueling a gentleman act. If you were going to talk smack about one another, they were going to call you out to a duel. And so basically, Dickinson and Jackson duel. Dickinson actually ends up shooting Jackson first, as you can see in this picture right here. Jackson is holding his left breast right here, right along the chest. He was actually shot first by Dickinson. And it almost hit his heart, but it did not. Jackson put his hand up over the wound to secure it, fired his gun, and ended up killing Dickinson. Now, the Federalist will call Jackson out on this. Again, look at the date, 1806. This was even before he became a national hero at the Battle of New Orleans. And the Federalists will call him out on this. John Quincy Adams, when he runs against him, will call him out. Those coffin handbills, you can go back in the PowerPoint slides and look and see that piece of Federalist propaganda of the coffin handbills of the men and the deeds of what Jackson had done. It is believed Jackson killed anywhere between 5 to 100 men in duels. We don't know the exact number. We just know it's somewhere between 5 and 100. And so that just kind of shows Jackson's resolve. The fact that he can be shot, and he's going to keep fighting, which that leads us to the Battle of New Orleans. He's a fighter, but more so than that, he's not going to take uh, trash talking him, his friends, or anything of that nature. He's not going to deal with it, and he's going to attack it head on. And to make matters even more interesting about his presidency, is he is the first sitting U.S. president to have an assassination attempt against his life take place. Crazed Englishman attempted to kill him, brandished his pistol, tried firing it. It didn't fire. He grabbed another pistol, tried firing that. It didn't fire. It is believed that Jackson rushed him and tried to beat him over the head with his cane before Davy Crockett, who is pictured right here, came and tackled the man. Jackson was not shot at this point in time. But what it does though is it hardens Jackson. Jackson thinks that there's people out there to get him. In particular, this new political party that had established itself called the Whigs. He believes that they're out to get him. They're out to derail his presidency. They're out there to um, go after what he's trying to achieve and his vision of the country, which then kind of leads us not into the controversy subject, but into kind of a whole nother topic. And that's the development of the two party system, but inside of it, this idea of the spoils system. And the spoil system really is just political patronage. It's giving jobs to people that are your friends, not based upon their merit, but based upon are they your friend or are they not? Right. So it's to the victors belongs the spoils. Let me stop this video before it
Meanwhile,
starts.
Councilwoman Joanne Watt.
Okay, we'll watch that later. But the spoil system was something that Jackson brought to the White House. Instead of placing men in certain positions based upon their merit and based upon their expertise, he placed men inside certain positions inside his cabinet, inside his presidency, because they were friends with him, because they basically would agree with him. And it's simply known the spoil system is just otherwise known as political patronage, government offices given to political supporters for whatever reason it may be. You gave them campaign support, money, or you're good friends with them, so they're going to reward you with a job for supporting them. And so after the assassination attempt on Jackson's life, he really starts hacking his cabinet with people who are not technically mm, have the what would you say they have the resume for the job rather that they're just friends with Jackson or that they'll agree with Jackson. And also the second thing before the controversies is this second two-party system that is developing. If you've heard back, George Washington said in his farewell address, do not split into political factions, no partisanship, right? And yet it still happened. You remember Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans here, and John Adams and the Federalists. That took place from about 1790 to 1816. We call this the first two party system. And then during the era of good feelings, after the War of 1812, and everyone behind the Democratic Republicans, the Federalists drop out. But in 1828, coming out of the ashes of the Federalist Party would be a brand new party. They're called National Republicans. And in simple terms, we just like to call them the Whigs. Right? And the Democratic Republicans simply drop the Republican tagline and they call themselves the Democrats. The Democrats will be, of course, the party of Andrew Jackson, and the Whigs will be what was known as the former Federalist Party. Right. And if we just kind of take a quick little breakdown here, I'm not going to talk about all of this, but I'm just going to let you see it and go through it and just kind of see this is the second party system. Right. Leaders Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson, and just kind of get through this really quick. Basically put, the Whigs are the Federalists. They believe in loose construction of the Constitution. They want the government involved in the economy. Their support base comes from the Northeast. One way to think of this, guys, is just simply the Whigs were the Federalists are the Whigs, and then the Democrats are the Democratic Republicans. They just dropped the Republican tagline and just call themselves Democrats for the party of Andrew Jackson. Now into the controversies. The first controversy, of course, is the Indian Removal Act, or basically where Andrew Jackson is going to force the Cherokee tribe here in southern Appalachia to move themselves out to the unorganized territory, which that's going to become a problem. If you take American too, you'll figure out what happens in this Oklahoma land rush that takes place out there with their tribe there. Basically put, white common men wanted this land. The Cherokee lived on this land. They had made a treaty with the government in the late 1700s that they could keep their land out here in southern Appalachia and the areas of Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia, and parts of Alabama as well too, that they could keep their land and that they could stay there. However, as ever encroaching men kept coming out there, they wanted this land, and so Jackson supported the common man since that's who voted for him, and he forced the Cherokee to leave in what simply becomes known as the Trail of Tears. The forced march was incredibly harsh. It was not an easy march. They had to do this all by foot or by horse or by wagon. Hundreds of thousands, we do not know the exact number of how many Cherokee would die from the march, but quite a few did die on this march. And this creates a lot of controversy, not at the time period, not at this direct time, although there will be a Supreme Court case, Worcester versus Georgia, that takes place at this time, but I'm not going to ask you to remember that. But there is a lot of controversy that followed after this, but not technically during the time that Jackson was president. The bigger of the issues was his bank war, and this was probably the biggest, second big, or first biggest controversy. Second biggest will, of course, be the nullification crisis, but this is the first biggest controversy that he deals with, and it's Jackson versus the bank. Second Bank of the United States that had been rechartered, if you remember, from Henry Clay's American system. That's the very first point of bit right there. Bank of the United States had been rechartered in 1860, and it was to be chartered for 20 years. Well, in 1836, that second charter was about to come up. Jackson did not support the bank. He did not like the bank. He distrusted the bank. He felt that it gave too much power to the rich elite bankers and businessmen of the Northeast, and therefore did not support the common man. And so he wants to do away with it. In fact, Jackson calls the Bank of the United States a hydra of corruption, that it was only there to support rich elite bankers and businessmen from the Northeast. Now, the Whigs at the time who they supported, and the rich businessmen and the rich bankers, would charge that Jackson was just going to create these pet banks, these banks that he supported, the banks that were in charge by his friends that he could benefit from. And so they dubbed it pet banks. Right. And with this hydra of corruption, what he basically was attempting to do was to turn the money back over to regional state banks instead of having one centralized bank of the United States. Now, in this political propaganda piece right here, this is Nicholas Biddle. He is the Secretary of the Treasury, and basically, he tries to outmaneuver Jackson before Jackson can actually veto the bill that had passed Congress. And Biddle tries to attempt to recall all loans from the states and then deny any brand new loans of credit to the states, trying to basically create an economic recession in an attempt to show the people, hey, look, you need a central bank. However, Jackson caught it in time and therefore kind of curbed an economic collapse that was about to happen. And then Jackson then killed the bank. He vetoed the bill that passed the House, and therefore we no longer have a Bank of the United States. And this money is going to be turned over to 23 state banks, in which are dubbed by the Whigs pet banks. And so this is what their political cartoon looks like, and hence where we get the Democratic slogan right here, the donkey. We all know what another word for donkey is, and so therefore Jackson's head is on the donkey's body, and basically it just sticks. There it is. And so Jackson is dubbed as the Pent Bank Master. He gets the slogan of the Democratic Party, and this is where it comes from. It's over the bank war with Jackson, right? And it's kind of funny just to think about it. Like Jackson says, the bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. And he did kill the bank. There will not be a central bank from this time period all the way up until Woodrow Wilson creates what we know today as the Federal Reserve, our current central bank, the central bank of the United States, which takes place in 1919 at Jekyll's Island. And so, therefore, we don't have a central bank from the time Jackson kills it all the way to the Federal Reserve, who circulates the money that you guys love to spend wherever you spend it at. But what's funny about this is Jackson hated the Bank of the United States. He hated a centralized bank. Isn't it ironic and kind of funny that somehow, some way, he ends up getting put on the $20 bill? I, I, I really don't know any other way to put it except for, isn't it irony? Andrew Jackson is on a central banknote, the $20 bill, even though that he killed the bank. He didn't want the bank. He hated the bank. Fun little note of history, and hence why they're trying to replace him from the $20 bill and put someone else on there. Right. And this is how the Whigs kind of portrayed him after this whole bank war, that he is the master of the veto, King Andrew the First. He tramples on the Constitution of the United States. He does not listen to the will of the people, and he does his own thing. That's basically what this cartoon says about contemporary opinions of Andrew. You ask any contemporary historians today, they consider him a tyrant for what he did with the Indian Removal Act and how he killed the central bank, that he was a proponent of the increase of slavery throughout the South and into the West, that he didn't stand and stop anything from happening. He was just a tyrannical king that did not listen to the people. And so this is how contemporary Americans, historians for that matter, portray Jackson and who he is. And in the 1832 presidential election, the national bank was the central issue of this election. Should the bank keep going or should the bank be killed? And of course, Jackson supported the fact that the bank should be done away with. Clay supported the bank. I mean, it was part of his American system. And Jackson ends up winning this election pretty handily too, 219 to 49. And so this just puts even more resolve into Jackson's mind that he can go ahead and veto any piece of legislation that Congress tries to pass to keep the bank, and ends up nixing it and does away with it. And then the final issue was the nullification crisis from 1828 to 1833. Now, I will say this: Jackson didn't create the problem. When John Quincy was president, he had helped out and agreed with Henry Clay's America system, economic self sufficiency for America. The goal of it, of course, was to create a Bank of the United States, which we now know Jackson will end up killing after its 20 years. He wanted internal improvements and he wanted protective tariffs. All right. Now, the South, as I remember from class time, the South didn't see this as supporting them or helping them. And so the South was going to do everything they could to try to get rid of this, in particular, the tariffs portion of it. And the Tariff of 1828, this was not when Jackson was president, but when John Quincy was president, goes ahead and passes this tariff. And it's just simply known as the Tariff of 1828, or otherwise known as the Tariff of Abomination. It is the highest tariff rates ever passed by Congress. It's a part of the American system, and it passes through Congress pretty simplistically, of course, because the South doesn't have enough representation in the House of Representatives to stop it from passing, and they can't stop it from going through the Senate, and the president will pass it at the time. It is a protective tariff in excess of money necessary to finance the government because, again, at this time, they did not tax personal income, and they won't tax personal income until the 16th Amendment is passed, which allows the federal government to tax your personal income. So, if you can't tax people's personal incomes, how is the government going to raise money? And the way that they felt they were going to do it through Henry Clay's American system was a protective tariff, which that is the tariff of 1828. And the South saw that as an abomination or the most terrible, wicked deed to have ever happened. Now, the three major industries in America at this point in time were commerce, shipping, trading, agriculture, and manufacturing. All right. Which industry benefits from a protective tariff? If you say manufacturing and commerce, you're right. A tariff does not benefit agriculture. In fact, it harms agriculture. In the South, well, that's what they do. They are all agriculture. They are not manufacturing and commerce. And so you can kind of see right here who voted in favor of it in the House and who did not vote for it. And if you look, New England was slightly against it, primarily because they felt it would cut trade off. But look at right here, the Mid-Atlantic states, so Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, all right, Kentucky, Illinois. These are these Mid-Atlantic states, and they are highly in favor of it. Right, and the West is highly in favor of it, and you can see the South, they aren't. Right, so did the Tariff of 1828 provide for the general welfare of all? 105 to 94 is pretty close. And if we go to the Constitution, it says Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, or tariffs, imposts, and excises to pay for the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Well, the South claimed that this tariff was not for the general welfare of the United States, that it was only for the West, that it was only for the Midwest states and for big bankers and manufacturer owners, that that's all it protected. And so they said, just like if we remember from the Alien and Sedition Acts passed by John Adams, when Thomas Jefferson replied back with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, that the Sedition Act was a violation of the Constitution. It took away your First Amendment right. Well, the same can be said here. The South felt that this tariff right here of 1828 did not provide general welfare for all the states of America, that it only provided for the businesses of the Northeast, the Mid Atlantic, or the Middle States, and this West out here. That's who it provided for. It didn't provide anything good for them. So, verting off back of what Thomas Jefferson did to the Alien and Sedition Acts and write the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, the South is going to attempt to try to get rid of this tariff. Right? And this brings in the idea of nullification. All right. South Carolina was the first to really jump into it, which we'll talk more about South Carolina. A very famous historian once said South Carolina is too small to be a country and too big to be an insane asylum. I think that really ties in nice because South Carolina is going to keep popping their head up again from here on out. But South Carolina threatened to nullify the tariff of 1828. They refused to collect the borders or the tariffs within the state's borders. And John C. Calhoun would write what's called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. Now, at first, he didn't put his name on it, but everyone knew he wrote it. So he came out and he said it, which ruined any chance he had at a presidential bid, which he was thinking about doing. But he writes this South Carolina Exposition and Protest. And the one thing to take from it is compare it basically to the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. He's calling out the government in this compact theory that, listen, if states don't want to agree upon a federal law passed, they don't have to. And it's simply put just like that. And we revert back to it, resolved from the Kentucky resolutions, resolved that the several states composing of the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to their general government, and that whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts unauthoritative, void, and of no force. Basically put, that if states feel that the federal government is passing laws that are not beneficial to all states, then basically the state has every right to reject them. Now, if you remember from the Alien and Sedition Acts, Jefferson believed in nullification. Now, the other writer of the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, Madison, did not believe in nullification. But Jefferson was behind this idea of nullifying federal law by the states. And so when Jackson becomes president, this is one of the first dilemmas and controversies he has to deal with. Does he defend states' rights, which he is a proponent of states' rights, but as president of the United States, how does he support federal authority? Does he let the states take control and therefore limit the power of the federal government, or does he use a show of force? Hence why this becomes a controversy. Now, Jackson, being a Southerner, basically calls John C. Calhoun up to Washington and makes a toast with him, in which he basically just, says, ooh, pardon me, he makes a toast with him, and they work out a deal between the two of them, right? That Jackson will go ahead and reduce the tariff of 1828, and therefore John C. Calhoun would quit this whole nullification bit. But all the Congress knows, because Jackson didn't tell anybody that he was meeting with John C. Calhoun, all Congress knows is that South Carolina is attempting to nullify. And so Congress goes on to have a debate, what we simply know as the Hayne-Webster debate, about this idea of nullification. It was a debate in the U.S. Senate concerning the constitutionality of nullification. And Daniel Webster led the charge. He's an anti-nullification man from Massachusetts, and he leads the charge against South Carolina, saying to his fellow colleagues in Congress, listen, we cannot allow states to just do whatever they want and think that they can get away with it. And so, therefore, he basically convinces Congress to try to put a stop to this and make the president use force or use the military to go down into South Carolina and make sure that they are collecting the taxes. As Webster says, liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable. Thank you, Carl.